Good morning, Spring Oneers. That's what I'm going to call you, the Spring Oneers. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you all enjoyed the main stage, setting us up for a great 2 days here. You are at the beginner-friendly spring track. I'm your host, Bob Brindley. I'll be here all day introducing the presenters, and we are excited to start the day off with our very first presenter, a very good friend of mine and someone who's going to walk you through what is Spring is the title. Please, everyone, welcome Glenn Renfro.
Well, thank you, Bob, for that wonderful intro. And I am going to now give you the presentation of fun. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Spring One. So if you're saying, I've heard about Spring and I'm not sure what it is, this talk is for you. If you say, I used to use Spring many years ago, and I kind of want to know, where's it at now? This talk is for you. If you say, what, I've got an hour and I need to listen to something as I sip my coffee that's going to be relaxing, well, this talk is for you. So with that being said, let's go ahead and start our fun. Guys, I'm still hearing you on through my screen. Yay, everybody. Okay. Awesome. So, all right, folks, if you hadn't had a chance, take a look at our safe harbor statement. You can actually go in and do a screenshot of this if you want to. And it's just basically our legalese to saying, what we're talking about today is information purposes and not to be incorporated in contract. With that being said, who am I? Well, my name is Glenn Renfro. And I am a contributor and committer on Spring Cloud Dataflow, Spring Cloud Tasks, Spring Batch, and kind of anywhere they need me. I'm a VMware engineer. And also, when I am not coding on these projects, I'm on the board of directors and a volunteer for the Atlanta Java Users Group, and also a volunteer and on the board of directors of an open source conference called DevNexus. With that being said, the first thing I want to do is go in. I'm going really fast there. I want to go in and say, talk about how does the community feel about Spring before we kind of go into what is Spring. Well, according to SNCC's 2020 JVM report, exactly 6 out of 10 Java developers depend on Spring framework for the production of their application. That is a huge vote of confidence from the JVM community or the Java developers out there that they would use a third-party market tool like Spring in order to create and work on their production environment applications for their office. But also, Spring's growth is accelerating. When we look at Spring, we have this site called start.spring.io. And basically, start.spring.io allows you to create just the foundation of your project. Like if you're using Maven, it's your pom.xml, or if it's Gradle, it's your build.gradle project. It gives you just a sample test and your main file. Kind of a great place to do the kickoff of any project. Well, in 2019, we had over 15 million projects that were started at start.spring.io. Don't worry, I'm going to give you a little tutorial or show or demo on that in a little bit. Well, from 2018 to 2019, we saw a 63% growth in Spring project generations between 2018 and 2019. So what we're seeing is that growth is accelerating. Well, if you're a Stack Overflow fan like me, they produce I think it's an annual report, and they had one of the categories most loved framework. Well, year over year, Spring popularity went up by 9%. So we see that the growth is accelerating, and the ecosystem is strong enough where people like it and they want to build projects on it. If you're a stargazer on GitHub, that is, if you look at the Spring Boot project, which we'll be talking a lot more about as a foundation to start your projects, you'll see that it has over 50,000 stars. Now, finally, Glenn is getting to the question at hand. What is Spring? Well, I went to the sage, Phil Webb, who is the project lead on Spring Boot. And he gave a talk about 2 years ago, and he worded it this way. I thought it was really cool. Spring is an integration framework designed to take lots of different technologies and allow you to combine them in ways that feel natural. He further says, it gives you a consistent programming model. So let's think about it this way. So not only does Spring give utilities to reduce the amount of code that you are writing, to give you high quality code, but also in the way that it actually goes through and in the Spring infrastructure. Okay, I'm still getting some folks. I can still hear you. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I can hear you guys. Sorry. You're welcome. Hello? 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 One second, folks. I apologize. Okay. There you go. I'm sorry, folks. I'm hearing multiple conversations here. So let's get back to Phil. Okay. So with that being said, it gives you that consistent programming model. So the goal is not only to give you the ability to improve, reduce the amount of code that you have derived with great set of utilities, but also it gives you that consistent model. So no matter what technology I pull in, I'll be able to take advantage of those. I'll be able to take advantage of that, again, that consistent model between each of those technologies that I'll be pulling in. So that reduces that learning curve. So how did it all get started? It's time for your history lesson. And with that, we had two folks, Rod Johnson and Jürgen Holler, that were doing a lot of consulting, and they utilized these patterns with their customers to improve the outcomes of their projects. And they were so successful that Rod said, what if I go in and I write a book about it? But then they got together and said, what if we take these same patterns and create an implementation of it? And with that implementation was thus born the Spring framework. So some of the patterns that the Spring framework gave us were inversion of control and dependency injection. What are those? So for those folks that don't know it, I'm going to give a brief tutorial. For those folks that know it, hey, check me for validation right here. So with it, inversion of control. Back in the day, and this is like 2004, 2005, when I wrote a project, I would have to write the control flow for my project. It was a lot of boilerplate on how the app was supposed to behave. What Spring Framework did was they said, what if you pull us in and we handle that control flow in such a way that you will write just classes, or if you will, beans that you will plug into our framework. These beans would contain our business logic. And so with that, what I would do by plugging it in, at the right time, Spring would call my bean to apply the business logic, to do the business work, if you will. You would think of it as the idiom, don't call us, we'll call you. Meaning instead of me telling Spring, run me this way, Spring says, you plug in your bean to us and we'll know when to call it. But no bean lives in isolation. I would create mini beans that do various business implementations. And yet they need to be able to grab resources that they need, right? So if I'm using a bean that needs to hit off of a data source, right, I need to have that somehow wired into my bean. Well, in the past, I would have to go in and write the code to be able to wire that into my bean. Well, with Spring and the use of dependency injection, what happened is that I could go in and just say at my constructor time, I need a data source, or I could annotate a attribute in my class and say, I just need a data source. I don't care where it comes from, just give it to me. And what Spring would do is Spring says, hey, you declared this dependency injection and you need it in this and this and this bean, and it would what we call wire it in or auto wire it in. So next, right after that, Spring would also provide utilities. So we didn't have to write all this boilerplate code. And then they said, why leave it there? We can also give you tooling to be able to save you time as you write your testing. And they also gave us a basic suite of database tools. And they also provided us a way in which to write our web applications. Okay, again, for the folks that know what MVC, give me 30 seconds, or not everybody knows what it is, so let's talk about it, okay? With that, what is MVC? So I need to create a web application. And so what MVC stands for is Model View Controller. It separates the various concerns of what it takes for me to create a web application. So first, the controller. It's the middle person. It is the one that's going to receive the request from the users and give them the response back. So let's say it this way. The controller receives a request from the user. And that would be, the controller would then pass that on to the model. From that point, the model would go out and grab the data from the database, apply the business logic, the business rules, or whatever it needs to do, and hands that result back to the controller. The controller then gives that data that came back from the model to handle it to give it to the view. The view then renders what the user expects the data to look like and kind of clean it up or whatever and make it into like a RESTful reply or whatever it needs to be, hands it back to the controller, and then again, the control being the middle person, hands that back to the user. So we see these three concerns. Well, I went out and I said, I want to show people what it looked like to write an MVC, the old school, where you had to go through and write the control flow and all that. And the truth was, I couldn't find one because no one writes them anymore, and especially in Java, right? So what they did, so what I saw is that people rely on a framework to do that for us. And so we don't want to write that, right? But Spring said back in 2000, I think it's 2005, said, what if we just allow them to create a bean that contains the controller like we see below with just saying hello world. We then allow them to declare that bean and then create a web XML so that they know what servlet to call and all that stuff. So instead of writing literally what would be pages of code, we could write it down into just 3 code segments. So what we have just learned about is the history of Spring. We've also learned about what the basic foundations of Spring, the Spring framework is. So what does Spring look like now? Oh, well, okay, we've grown a little bit since 2005, okay? And sometimes I even think it catches Phil Webb surprised. We have everything from the Spring framework that we created to Spring Boot that allows me to build apps that work right out of the box, but also Spring Data, Spring for simplifying the ability to get to that data, our data via data sources. Spring Cloud for working and helping us to make life easier for our microservices or web applications and applications that work in a distributed environment, along with so many other projects. But you're saying, good grief, where do we start? Well, I want to categorize these things into individual units. So you could say, oh, I go to here to look for this. I go to here to look for that. So first, the Spring framework. Jürgen Holler talked about it. He still works on it to this day. And it's a vibrant and living framework. And it is the foundation for all Spring projects. So we look at Spring and we say the next level they said, we want to create additional projects, but we don't want to put them into the framework because they are in themselves used as need. So we went and said, okay, the Spring framework stays and it will be added, enhanced, and grows on its own. But we want to create projects that will work off the Spring framework. Things like security, integration, stuff like that, right? So with it, we created these other projects that you can utilize to be able to build your applications. We have the Spring Security. Spring Security is a powerful, highly customizable authentication access control framework. It is the de facto standard for securing web-based applications. We also have Spring Batch. We saw where many companies and customers were writing applications that were scheduled. They would launch, do their work, and then complete. And then we said, what if we could provide them a series of readers and writers to save them time, as well as handle the transaction and the restartability? Well, in that, we created Spring Batch. Then we said there was a book that came out, and I saw it on many developers' desks. It was a big, thick book, and it was called Enterprise Integration Patterns. And what this book said was we have patterns that follow the flow of message from one system to the next through channels, routing, and transformations. It became the de facto for building applications via these patterns. And we said at Spring is, what if we create an implementation for that so people wouldn't have to write all this code? And with that being said, Spring integration was born. But then we took the next level, so that there is, most apps need to be able to hit a data source of some kind, and a data source is where all these types from graph to key value to relational, and it goes on and on. And we said, what if we could help people, the developers, integrate with these? So we created Spring Data, and Spring Data's mission is to provide a familiar and consistent Spring-based programming model for data access while retaining the special traits of underlying data store. So think about it this way. I could write a JDBC app that uses JDBC, but then again, I can go and write one from Neo4j. But since I know how to write using Spring, the ability to transition that knowledge and that how I wrote this app in JDBC kind of will fit and reduce that learning curve that we go for Neo4j. Spring Data is a very valuable project. But then, as time went on, of course, applications became more complex. And as they became more complex, we started realizing that it became more tedious to be able to integrate all these technologies together. We also realized the ability to know what are good defaults. How do we want to configure these apps so that they can work together without colliding together in a simple way, to allow developers to get started on working on the business problem at hand instead of worrying about this dependency configuration mire, right? So we created Spring Boot. And Spring Boot makes it easy to create a standalone production-grade Spring-based application that just runs. If you think about it, what Spring Boot does is it gives you an opinionated starter configuration, provides opinion starter dependency to simplify your build configuration. Thus, instead of me having to say, okay, I need to grab this, create this, and create this to build let's say a Kafka template, what if I could just add a dependency to my code that would pre-configure and add that automatically? And Spring Boot does that. One of the other things that it does is some people say, well, does it get in the way of actually me writing the code? No, Spring Boot quickly gets out of the way as your requirements diverge from the defaults. But, and yeah, I was about to say, and it works right out of the box. So if we think about it this way, remember this, where we'd have to go in and have a web XML, we'd have to declare the bean that we want to have and manage that, and then we would have to go in and create our controller. That's fine, this is really, really small. What if I could do all that just right here? Spring Boot takes and does away with a little bit of that boilerplate coding so I can focus on this right here. One question I get, do I have to use Spring Boot? Can I just use the Spring framework? The answer is absolutely. It's your choice, but Spring Boot does save you a lot of time in the development of your applications. But applications don't just live in isolation. They live in an ecosystem in distributed environments, whether it's on-prem, in the cloud, or in a blended environment. So we realized that when I'm deploying an application, and we could go ahead and start using the word microservice, they need certain features in our ecosystem so they can communicate with each other, right? And do what they're supposed to do. Things like configuration management, service discovery, circuit breakers, intelligent routing, things like that. So we created the Spring Cloud suite of projects to give you those features that you need to have your application or your microservices work in a distributed environment. If you want to think about it, it comes at many levels. Things that where I may be on Azure, AWS, or GCP, and I need to take advantage of the services that these cloud offerings offer. And I want to use and implement these features in a simple way. And then again, that using that smooth Spring way style of coding, these projects, Spring Cloud offers these projects to simplify your life, as well as what about if I need to want to be able to know how to route my API request, like we talked about before, or AJ brought up before. We have Spring Cloud Gateway that does that. Don't worry, we'll cover these in a little bit more detail, so you don't have to copy all these down. We'll make life a little easier for you. But then we realized, finally, on the Spring Cloud front, is that when we deploy these out into this distributed environment, we're not talking about running a few apps in isolation. We're talking maybe hundreds of streams of data where I might have 4 apps that I deploy in a microservice stream. I might not just have one of those. I could have hundreds. And I need to be able to know, how do I at what time do I need to repave them? How can I repave them? How do I know? How can I upgrade them, roll them back in a simple way? And with that being said, Spring Cloud Data Flow allows me to orchestrate my deployment of my applications or my microservices into a distributed environment. Similarly, if I have batch applications that need to be scheduled, and again, when we talk about running batch applications, we're not talking like 10 or 20, we're talking hundreds, thousands, or 10,000s. I need to be able to launch those, schedule those, be able to go to a common place to check, were they successful? If they were not successful, how can I restart them? Spring Cloud Data Flow allows me to do that. But before we leave this page here, let's talk about one more thing. We've just gone through this reactive revolution. Reactive, in the past, we always wrote our code imperatively. Well, nowadays, we have a choice. One of the things we're looking at is making our apps more, to reduce the footprint of our apps in production. Meaning, we want to remove things such as, or reduce blocking, or use our threads more effectively. Reactive style coding allows us to do that. So notice that we created the project Reactor to simplify life when you're creating these reactive-based coding. Notice that it's at the same level as the Spring Framework. The Spring Framework hooks into the Spring Reactor project. And thus, since it's at the foundation, most projects above, we see, take advantage of where you can choose whether you want to write them as imperative or reactive. Everything from data, integration, security, your Spring Boot apps, and many projects in the Spring Cloud ecosystem. Now, for a demo that will take a long time at a desk that's far, far away. Okay, how about if it doesn't take that long, and if you're near Atlanta, Georgia, it's not that far away. So we're going to go to start.spring.io to begin the building of our application. So I'm going to leave the PowerPoint fun here. I'm going to bring up my Chrome, and I'm going to just do a little bit so I can see my URL here. And I'm going to type start.spring.io. And what we get with start.spring.io is we see that it takes us to this web page, and it says Spring Initializer. This is actually a Spring project. And it creates this foundation for you for building a Spring Boot application. It's not code generation, right? It just gives you that foundation. And this is, if you remember when I said that 18 million projects were created using start.spring.io, this is the site. Now, Spring Initializer is also being used by many companies. They pull it in and modify it because there's certain things they want their projects to have when they start off. So they actually take and build off a Spring Initializer for their own company. But what a lot of companies still do to start a project is to go to start.spring.io. So what does this do for us? Well, first off, it lets me select what kind of project I want to have. I can do a Maven project. I can do a Gradle project. It's up to you and what you want to do. Again, I can choose what language. Spring works with Java, Kotlin, Groovy, whichever language you want to use, Spring will be there. Today, we're going to use Java. Again, I'm going to be building this off of Spring Boot. And so I'm going to use the current GA release, which is 2.3.3. I'm going to rename. I'm going to leave all the project metadata, except for I want to change the name to S1 MVC. We'll just call it demo for today. I want to package it up as a jar. I want to use this foundation build. I want to be Java 11. And now So you remember where we had before, and we saw where I had the 3 files, the web XML, the bean declaration, and the actual code I want to use, and I want to just do the boot style. I just want to write the code, right? So I want to add a starter dependency. So I click this button called Add Dependency, and I want to create a web-based application. And it shows me that I can choose Spring Web. And it says basically build web, including RESTful applications using Spring MVC. Uses Apache Tomcat as default embedded container. What that means is that if it's going when I start my application right out the gate, it's going to have an embedded Tomcat in, meaning I don't have to take my jar and plug it into a Tomcat. It has it embedded, it's ready to go and start running at that very moment. So I'm going to go ahead and select Spring Web. Now, what Spring Initializer will do for me now is once I click Generate, it's going to create a zip file. And that zip file contains my project bits. And you'll notice that it says demo 7, and that probably means I may have created a demo or two right off of my project, or I may have created a few demos in my past. So with that, let's go to my IDE. Oh, there we go. I lost my mouse there for a second. Here we go. So let's go to and import that project I just created. There we go. It's going to actually be in my downloads. I'm going to open demo 7, and I'm going to open it in my IDE. My IDE wakes up, and it is importing the project in. We'll play the Jeopardy thing. Was that fast? Okay. I'm going to zoom in and show you the bits real quick. So first off, it created the pom.xml, right? So I don't have to write that. Start.spring.io did it for me. And we can see that it has the name that I gave it. It's also including that starter web. So all I have to do is focus on the code I want to write. But also it creates the other dependencies I need to have a Spring Boot project. So all that's pre-configured. I can then also see that it created me a foundation test. Just all it does is start my app and does anything. You'll provide the tests that you want to have. And then lastly, it provides, there we go. We can see that it gives me my main. All right, so I don't have to write any of that. That's done for me. So now what I want to do is focus on what? Creating my controller, the thing that actually says hello world. So I'm going to create a new class. I'm going to call it hello world controller. And it creates that class for me. So I want this to be a REST controller. All I want to do is just say hello world. Nothing fancy, right? So I'm going to say REST controller. And then I'm going to go to the hello world controller. And I'm going to say I want to have a public string print hello. I'm not going to take any parameters. This is just going to be sweet and fun. And we're going to say return hello world. Hit return. And I want to say, I want to go ahead and say, okay, this is going to be endpoint I want people to hit off of. I want this method to be that. Oh, I said print hell. Oh, that's not nice. How about print hello? There we go. That's friendlier. I like that better. At request mapping. And I want to hit off the hello endpoint. Now, I bet y'all didn't see that. I am so sorry. That was small. Well, that's what I wrote. So I hope I didn't cause anybody to have to squint their eyes too much there. So with that, I'm going to go to my terminal. And I'm going to run this right from the command line using a special tool that Spring Boot gives us from building my project using start.spring.io, spring-boot, or I should say the boot plugin. There we go. And we'll see that it's actually starting my app. It's going to start the Tomcat embedded, and it's going to be able to hit off of the localhost 8080. So we're going to go back to our wonderful little browser right here. And we're going to say localhost 8080 hello. And we see that we got, zoom in, Glenn. There we go. And it said hello world. Well, let's take it to one more step. Let's say hello Spring 1, not Spring 1. If I could type, that always helps, doesn't it? All right, and from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do a classic build. Maven W and we'll do a clean package. And we can see that it's going to do the full build process. It's actually going to be like and run our tests. See that that's running the test. It says, yay, everything's successful. And then I can say java-jar target, and we'll say demo there. And again, it'll start. And as it's starting, we'll go back to our browser. And if I hit refresh, yay, hello, Spring One. We've just created a basic MVC application. So with that, let's play from our current slide and continue on our presentation. Okay, you can do it. Yay, start.spring.io. Remember, start all your projects at start.spring.io. If you ever want to have hear a wonderful, the wonderful things it can cure, go listen to Josh Long's talk on starting Spring project, Spring Boot. I guarantee you'll get a chuckle out of it. If you want to learn more about Spring Boot, you're like, yeah, I want to see what else I can do with it. At 11 a.m. today, right after this talk, there's a talk on fundamental Spring Boot. If you say, what can make my life easier writing Spring apps in my IDE? What are some wonderful tools I can use? Spring Tools 4 is going to come right after it at 11:35 today. This is all Eastern Daylight Time. And Friday, Josh Long is going to have a talk on a beautiful time. So if you're interested in a reactive primer and Spring Boot that is and the testing, and have a fun time listening to it. And I guarantee it's at 5 o'clock on a Thursday, not a Friday, Thursday. And you're saying, it's the end of the day. I guarantee if you watch it, you're going to have a lot of fun and learn a lot at the same time. Oh, wow. Pictures. Ooh, okay, where do we start from here? What are these? Well, one of the things I wanted to do before we leave today is I wanted to kind of say, here's some, kind of pattern areas that we use every day to be able to resolve problems in our code, right? So I said, what Spring projects would help you with each of these pattern areas? Well, let's talk about our web application. The one we just wrote, well, it was cool. It says hello, but we really wasn't it really didn't take advantage of all the things that a web application should do. Well, first off, it needs to have security, right? It needs to be able to access some data. Also, I want to know how healthy my application is. What are the metrics on it? Well, Spring offers these features for you. First, the foundation. If you see the icon down below, I'm going to point here from my screen, point down to below. You'll see that icon there. Learn it, love it, hug it. It is a Spring Boot icon. All the projects we're going to be talking about before are going to be based on Spring Boot. But when it comes to how do I add security to my application, we're going to use Spring Security. Spring Security is a battle-tested security framework. Spring Security supports many industry standard authentication protocols like SAML, OAuth, LDAP. It also it gives you out-of-the-box protection for things like OWASP attacks, like session fixation, clickjacking, cross-site request forgery, and more. So when you're looking at security in your applications, look to Spring Security. Again, what can we say? Spring Data simplifies our access to data stores, but also it gives us that ability to remember. It gives you that Spring style of coding so that when I'm moving from one to the other, it gives me that familiar feel. So it kind of, again, reduces that learning curve while saving me a lot of time and a lot of code while working on those various data sources. And lastly, how's my app doing? What are the metrics are there? Well, there's a project out there called Micrometer, and Spring Boot integrates using a starter to Micrometer. And what Micrometer does for us is it captures these metrics and stores these to a time series database or to something like Wavefront so that I can go in and check those like a Wavefront and see how's my application doing. And it also allows me to register alerts and all these wonderful things that Wavefront can do. With that, this data is caught using, again, Micrometer on Spring Boot. So if you're interested on any of these topics, tomorrow at 1:05, Spring Security Patterns talk will be there. If you're kind of, it's a little bit advanced, but I thought it was a really good talk. Running persistent data in a multi-cloud architecture today at 1:35 kind of gives you a good survey on that. If you're saying, I want to know more about metrics and capturing them and what it takes to do that, Spring Boot Observability today at 3:05 will be a great time, again, all this is Eastern Daylight Time, is a great talk to attend. You're saying, what is that? I will call this the symbol of microservices. So many of us have heard of microservices. Some of us have coded to it. Some of us don't know what it is. So we can have a common definition of what it is. Microservices are a modern approach to software whereby application code is delivered in small, manageable pieces, independent of others. Another way to think of it is this way. I'm going to give an example. Let's say I have a purchase order app. In this purchase order app, I want to have three major concerns. I want to capture the purchase order and store it. That's one. Two, I want to fulfill the purchase order. And then three, I want to be able to bill against that purchase order. Well, in the past, I would have a monolith, a large application that would have all three of those concerns. But let's say, for example, that the billing side takes a lot of effort, and we were starting to see where things were dragging down because we weren't able to build everything was slowing down because we didn't have enough processing power to be able to handle that billing within our application. So what we do is we scale up our monolith to be able to manage, to be able to keep up. Well, now what we've done is we've scaled up a large app for one section of the app that has a problem. What microservices does is it says, what if we were to break this up into the concerns and have a app that does the capturing the purchase orders and stores it. The other app goes in and fulfills, and then the third app bills. So if we go back to the problem I talked about before, where that purchase app, not the purchase app, but the billing app takes more cycles, what we can do is we can scale it up independently of the others, and thus allows me to be able to adjust my portions of my app without having to scale up the whole thing. It also allows my staff to be able to have knowledge and be able to have a business unit work on that particular section without having to have further knowledge on other things. Now, I can have full knowledge across all of them. That's fine. It's up to you and how you want to work the issue. One question I ask is people say, I hear microservices in Spring. Can I still write monoliths? Absolutely. Whether you're writing monoliths or modulus, Spring can support you in these locations. Well, again, when I'm running microservices, they don't live independently. They need to communicate with each other. And they also need to be able to communicate with each other on a distributed platform. And so the thing that I want us to understand about this is that, when I'm running a microservice application, what we see is that I need to have, there's certain rules to running a microservice app, and we call this the 12-factor patterns. And what this is certain rules that our microservices have to hold to be called a microservice. Things like external configuration, they have to be stateless, they have to log, you have to have connecting to backing service, there's service discovery. So there's services that you have to have in order for my microservice to live in this ecosystem, right? Well, to make life easier, well, Spring is there to help you yet again. Yay, Spring, woohoo! With that, there's things that services it provides, like a service registry, so I can register my microservices or services that my microservices need, so that we can do service discovery. I can have a config server. So one of the questions you might get is, if I'm running in, let me finish my thought. With config services, it gives me one location that my apps can go off in order to get their configurations. So Spring Cloud offers this config server to do that for you. But one of the questions I get from our Kubernetes folks is, do I need a config server if I already have config maps in my Kubernetes? The answer is, no, you don't need it. Use your config maps. They're awesome. But what you can do is, in those cases, is you can pick and choose what Spring Cloud services you need in your infrastructure. Again, if I'm running on-prem, I don't have a config server. Well, you will take advantage of this. Well, Also through Spring Cloud. One of the things is that my microservices don't live by themselves. They're working together through messaging frameworks, right? And we want to know and be able to find maybe there's a problem with some messaging between some microservices. I can use Spring Cloud Sleuth to be able to find and be able to do discovery on where my messages are going. Another is if my microservices are communicating with each other, are they maintaining their contracts? Are they, my microservice may say, I need to receive data in this way. How can I enforce that contract between services or know that I'm compliant? Well, Spring Cloud Contract offers that for you. Lastly, like AJ brought up, I'm receiving requests for API requests from various services, from browsers, IoT, or mobile. With that, I need to be able to know how to route those to the correct microservice. Spring Cloud Gateway does that for us. But what it does do, it allows me to do that configuration and that monitoring of these tracks in a simple and easy way. So if you're looking to that, Spring Cloud Gateway is a wonderful tool to use. Well, if you're interested in Spring Cloud, today at 12:05, we have Introducing Spring Cloud. If you want to know the real power of Spring Cloud, catch it on YouTube because it's happening right now. I'm sorry, but don't worry. We're going to be releasing some of these talks on YouTube, so catch them. But before you say, I don't have to attend the talks, yay, I'll just catch them on YouTube. Stop, but then stay, because after each talk, you're going to have the opportunity to talk with the presenter via Slack, and the presenter will have a chance to talk with you. And as a presenter, I look forward to doing that. Oh, another big symbol. What is this? Okay. All right. This is one of the things that we have is event-driven applications. We're going to be receiving data, right, from many different systems, and we just don't want that data just to, be picked up and ran and in a historical fashion. We want to absolutely handle that data as it come in. An example, let's say I am a pizza company that has been campaigning against the one big game a year. And and as that game begins, I want to capture social media. I want to know the impressions that are occurring from the customers that are out there on the social media chatting about our product, our pizza, or our service. And so I want to catch it live. So I want to start up a service that's going to hook into the Twitter fire hose and take in that data. Then I want to take that data and I want to send it to another app that's going to filter and transform that data. That's okay. I guess I should have slide that out a little bit there. And then lastly, I want to store that data and also send alerts to our staff so that they can go in and make a quick decision to maybe say, hey, a lot of people are talking about eating. Maybe I need to put out a campaign that says 20. Let's say, if you reach out to us in the next 15 minutes, we'll give you a 20% coupon if you use this code, right? So if we look at that, we can see that through that, we have the opportunity to act on that data. But that's a story. And I can write using Spring Boot. I can write these microservices in an easy way and use Spring Cloud to be able to deploy them out there. But there's one other little piece here that's missing. You see that little arrow there between them. I don't want that data to be ever lost. I want to guarantee that data gets from one microservice to the other. With that, I want to have a transport layer underneath, right? So I want to use something like Kafka, Rabbit, or Google PubSub, you name it, as an underlying infrastructure so I don't lose that data between them. But that means I have to know about those infrastructures. I won't be able just to write my business logic. Don't worry. Spring Cloud Stream is there to help us out. Spring Cloud Stream offers a bunch of starter dependencies that are called binders. And these binders allow me to do the following. I can write a function that, for example, in the filter and transform, that will have the parameter that will take in that data, that JSON data from Twitter, filter it, process it, and all that needs to happen, and then return it out as a function. So as a coder, all I'm going to do is write that function. The binder then says, at the time, I will find that function and I'm going to hook it into whatever platform you want. So let's say I'm using the Kafka binder that comes, again, that starter from Spring Cloud Stream. And what that means is that when I deploy my app, I will set the properties to say, if it's, again, Kafka, this is a topic I want to use. Here's my ensemble. Here's all this good stuff. And then what that means is, as a coder, I focused on the business problem, and the connectivity is handled at deployment time, and I don't have to write any of that code. Well, now, but when I create that stream, again, there's just not the one stream. It's hundreds of streams. It's just not for social media. It's for purchase orders. It's for all this stuff, right? So how can we handle this, right? How can we manage and, again, upgrade them, roll them back if there's a hiccup? What's their state? Do they feel good? Can I go to one place so I can hook into my metrics to check all those attributes on all these streams? To orchestrate these, we're going to use Spring Cloud Dataflow to do that for us. It's a huge time saver. If you're interested in learning more about Spring Cloud Stream, Mark Heckler's given a great talk today at 12:05 on Game of Streams. If you're interested in more about Dataflow, it's going to be tomorrow at 12:05. A special plug for that one. I'm also co-presenting on that. And remember, at the very bottom, look, it's Spring Boot. Woo, our hero. Okay. Let's continue on. My place is special to my heart. Batch applications. If you looked at my profile going in, I work on Spring Cloud Task and Spring Batches for Spring Cloud Dataflow. And with that, we have batch applications. They are tried and true. They exist to do that one thing. They work on the stuff that they need to work on, and they terminate. It reduces how much apps I need to take up resources at that time. And they do what they do extremely well. So there's a couple of things that a batch app can come in the form of. One, as we see here, it could just be a Spring Boot app that wakes up and does its work and finishes, and it's done. A Spring Boot app. But then my boot app is going to exist in a distributed environment. And so there's certain things that my boot app needs to do, even though it's what we're going to call ephemeral, meaning short-lived. It's got to be able to report whether it succeeded or not to a common location. In that case, how can I have it write to that one location instead of having to go in and try to go through my platform tooling and say, did that pod exist complete? Did this app task complete? Well, we have what's called Spring Cloud Task. Spring Cloud Task is another starter that you can do, that you can use and add just that @enabled task as an annotation to your boot application. And then it will record that information to a common database that you can always go to, no matter where that batch app is running or that boot app is running. It will always report back to that database. So you have one place you can go in and check things like, what time did it start? What time did it end? Did it succeed? If it failed, why did it fail? What was the exit code? And Spring Cloud Task also offers a lot of other features that make your life easier in running that ephemeral app into the distributed platform. Lastly, batch. Oh my gosh, batch saves so much time. Common things that I do: read, process, write. What if I could take those readers, right? And I have a common set of readers that all I have to use it to do is configure. No coding, just I can use the builder they have and just build out the configuration for my reader and my writer. So what this means is I could have a Mongo reader that I just configure, and let's say a Kafka writer writes to a topic, and I can take and just create those configuration. And then the primary code that I write is my process, the thing that does the filtering, the enrichment, the transformation, whatever I need it to do. In that sense, Spring Batch offers that for me. I have JDBC readers, JDBC writers, Mongo reader writers, RabbitMQ reader writers. It goes on and on and on, right? So you can take a look at the Spring Batch project to see what reader and writers are there and available to you. But more importantly, it not only offers that, it also gives me the ability to configure my transaction. I don't have to write the transaction model. It does it for me. I configure it to what I want it to do. And then lastly, let's say I'm running a batch app for 4 hours, an hour or two, it fails. I don't want it to go and have to go back to all the way to the beginning and run it for the 4 hours. I just want to run it for what? Just for that I want to have it pick up where that 2 hours is, at that 2 hour mark where it failed. And Spring Batch, I can configure how I want the app to restart. And by doing that, it will pick up where it left off. If you're interested more about Spring Batch, and forgot one more point. There's data flow again, orchestration. Again, I'm running batch apps in a production environment, right? And so I'm not just running tens or hundreds of batch apps. I'm running thousands or 10,000 apps, right? Where can I go to that one place? Remember, with Spring Cloud Task and for boot apps, and then running Spring Cloud Task with Spring Batch, because again, your Spring Batch apps will be running off of Spring Boot. Okay, you don't have to, but it saves a lot of time. They're going to record that to one database, right? What if I could have a tool that goes in and I can go in through a UI or a shell or even hit off of a RESTful API and say, how are my tasks doing? Or these ephemeral apps or batch apps, how are they doing? I could go and check and see which ones succeeded, and more importantly, which ones failed. And then I can, again, go into that UI tool or that shell or hit the RESTful API. Why did you fail? What happened? Can I restart you? All this good stuff, all the information is there. And so at that point, I can restart that job. As well as, again, since we have micrometer, I can add that to again, the stream apps we saw above, but also my batch apps below. So I can go to and collect metrics and see how my batch apps are behaving and while they're running and be able to catch all that data. It's pretty cool stuff, right? Well, if you're interested in this, again, you have Batching in a Modern Enterprise today at 2:05. That's by Michael Manella. Mahmoud's going to have a great talk on what's new in Spring. Sorry, folks, my sound just went out. I hope you can still hear me. Let's see. Jess, I apologize. I'm going to go off screen for just a second. I apologize for this. Oh, well, I think we're good. Okay. With that being said, we have the ability to, okay, going back. Okay. And also with Spring Cloud Data Flow, I can go in and take a look at Spring Cloud Data Flow and be able to learn how to orchestrate my batch applications using Spring Cloud Data Flow. One more point right here. In this case, I have the ability to also go in and create functions. Well, let's think about what do we mean by functions? With functions, I have the ability to say, what if I could write one function that could be, let's say the one that can handle the Twitter data, do the processing, the filtering, and all that stuff. What if I could use that one that I wrote for Spring Cloud Stream, but also use it as a RESTful endpoint? Meaning somebody could send me that Twitter, that JSON, and I do that enrichment, I do that work on it, and once I do that work on it, be able to hand that result back out, but write the code, but only once. With that, I have the ability to go in and sorry, I'm getting announcements back there. Sorry. With that, since I can only write it once, I can reuse it in multiple locations. Spring Cloud Function allows me to do that. And so with Spring Cloud Function, I can go in, write it once, and use it in many locations. It does things also for me. Again, kind of reiterating what I said before, I can write my functions imperatively or reactively. The other thing is that I may be receiving this data to this function, and it might come in slightly different formats. Through Spring Cloud Function, I have the ability to go in and do, it handles that type conversion for me. So Spring Cloud Function does a lot of work for me. So if you're interested in Spring Cloud Function, there's a couple more things that you can take a look at. One is there's today at 2:05, Oleg's going to be giving a talk on how to implement once and execute everywhere. Highly recommend that talk if you're interested in, again, writing your code once and use it in a lot of other places, right? The other is how can I connect my functions to RSocket? So if you are using RSocket reactive and you're looking at mixing it with functions, there's a talk tomorrow at 10:05 a.m. on that topic. Now you're going to say, Glenn, wow, the images, the conversation, you did that on your own. I'm like, no, I got it here on spring.io. You will be able to go here, and it's a great launching point to learn more about what is Spring, and allows you to go into those individual projects to see how they can help me. And then not only how can they help me, but also to be able to go in and see why I would want to use Spring in some of these other areas. It also gives you some guides that you can use to kick off and start new stuff. And if you look in the upper right-hand corner, I can use a light theme or dark theme. So that way you can choose which one you like, right? That's probably the most important question I ask when I go to a site. Can I choose a light theme or a dark theme? Okay. All right, back to one more slide, folks. Okay, so let's stay connected. So now what I've done so far is I kind of gave you a tour de France of all the various things, projects, and like some areas that you can look at to decide how you want your app to, sorry, again, another conversation popped up. The other thing is, you also have the ability to go in and focus, Glenn. Don't look at the conversations there. Okay, so while we covered projects and the use cases for those, what I wanted to do is spend just about 2 more seconds and say, let's look at at some of the talks I'm going to go to. One is a deep dive into Spring application events. So if you're kind of already into Spring, you can jump in and take a look at a deep dive into Spring application events. The other is that you can jump in and learn how to write better Java docs through If Hemingway Wrote Java Docs. With that, Bob, I think my presentation is over. Hello. Hey.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that, Glenn Renfro. We really appreciate all of that beginner Spring starting us off right. It's going to be a great day here, and there will be a Q&A open on the Slack channel. This will be the first time we're all trying that, so bear with us as there might be some learning ahead. But go over to the Spring One Slack channel and search for Glenn Renfro and the Beginner Spring, and you will be able to have a little Q&A with Glenn. So if you have any more questions, what is Spring? Again, is the name of the title track. And we'll be back in a few moments with Wai Lee from Liberty Mutual talking about fundamental Spring Boot, keeping it simple, keep it right, be productive, and have fun. And my daughter wants me to know that my son is not eating her breakfast. And that's the way it is this morning. Hope have a great day here at Spring One.